Every year as Christmas approaches, I hear, it seems like more and more, Christian people expressing concern about the way other people celebrate Christmas. It's all about Santa and spending money and eating and drinking too much, and the birth of Jesus seems to have been forgotten. Others express concern about the pressure to be respectful of people of other beliefs at times of Christian celebration. For some, I suspect there is a deep and understandable grief over the fact that decades ago you could come to church at Christmas and find the place overflowing, while today, well, there's more than enough room at the inn. Now, I could give good reasons why none of these things really should trouble us, but I don't think that would be helpful. We're living through a time of deep transition in the church and outside the church, and that is bound to unsettle people in ways that it can be really hard to articulate. Most of us quite like change, actually, when we get to choose it and control it. But when it is out of our control, when we're not sure we like the direction the change is taking us in, well then we get uncomfortable. Nobody enjoys that sort of change. But this morning, I want to suggest that noticing this discomfort we feel about not being able to control the changes in how Australians celebrate Christmas can actually help us enter into the Christmas story. Because that discomfort is exactly what all of the characters in the story would have been feeling. Mary and Joseph were tossed about by changes that were completely outside their control. As we read in Luke, in those days a decree went out from the Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. That's the sort of power this man had. And this was the first registration that was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Okay, so Mary and Joseph are forced to travel a great distance at the whim of a foreign dictator. Think about that. Jesus is God's place of his birth was decided by someone who had no knowledge of or love for God. The parents of the Messiah had no say in where the Messiah would be born. Things were not as they should be. Things were not in Mary and Joseph's control. And in the place of his birth today, there is more violence than ever, more babies and children in danger than ever, more mothers weeping for their children than ever. Things are not as they should be, just like things were not as they should be when Mary and Joseph travelled to Bethlehem while Mary was heavily pregnant. But this, wrong as it all is, this is how God entered the world. When things were not as they should be, when the main characters in the story were not in control of their own narratives. They were swept along by a tide of change, and yet, in all of this, God was entering that out of control history to bring even more change, but good change, new life, new undreamed of possibilities. So while powerful people in the far off capital were calling all the shots, and ordinary people were feeling that all the big decisions of history were happening to them, but without their consent, in that very chaos, God turns all of it upside down by entering the world through the womb of an ordinary woman, married to an ordinary man. The true course of history is bypassing the rich and the powerful. the ones to whom heavenly heralds are sent with this big news? No one special. Just ordinary people doing their ordinary business. The shepherds were just doing their thing that night, listening for sounds of predators, keeping the sheep safe, chatting among themselves over the fire, and suddenly angels appear and tell them that God has entered creation. There's no reason to expect that they would be the ones to receive this big news. But there they were, having a conversation with angels. Sometimes we feel like we have been swept up in momentous changes that we have no control over. Sometimes there seems to be just too much change, not enough control. But sometimes there's too little change. Sometimes life just feels mundane and ordinary. We get up in the morning, we get ready, we face the day and do whatever good we can do, and then we go to bed hoping we've made some small positive difference somewhere. Rarely are any of us sure that we have changed the world in any significant way. Well, the Christmas story is about something magnificent and momentous, God entering creation. But so many of the details of the story and so many of the characters of the story are just plain ordinary. The whole story is a startling mixture of the magnificent and the mundane. G.K. Chesterton wrote about this in these words: "The truth is that there is a quite peculiar and individual character about the hold of the Christmas story on human nature. It's not in its psychological substance at all like a mere legend or the life of a great man. It does not exactly, in the ordinary sense, turn our minds to greatness, to those extensions and exaggerations of humanity which are turned into gods and heroes even by the healthiest sort of hero worship. It does not exactly work outwards adventurously to the wonders to be found at the ends of the earth. It is rather something that surprises us from behind, from the hidden and personal part of our being, like that which can sometimes take us off guard in the pathos of small objects. It is rather as if someone had found an inner room in their very heart, or in the very heart of their own house, which they had never suspected, and seen a light from within. It is as if they found something at the back of their own heart that betrayed them into good, something more human than humanity, more human than humanity, not less, not extraordinary, but profoundly ordinary, beautifully ordinary, magnificently mundane, with a light inside. God is born in the ordinariness, and that gives us hope in our ordinariness. God is born into the world to and among ordinary people. God's promises are fulfilled in ordinary, yet unexpected ways. Angels told the shepherds that the Messiah, promised many times over many centuries, had finally arrived. And what would be the sign that this momentous event had taken place? Well, a baby dressed in wrapping bands and lying in a food trough. So basically what they were saying is this is how you'll recognize the great king who God promised to lead you in battle against all your enemies and establish God's reign over all rulers and authorities? There'll be this baby dressed in rags and looking homeless. not what anybody was expecting. All God's promises fulfilled in an insignificant little screaming, weeing, pooing bundle. And so, if you sometimes look at God's promises and then look at your life or at the world or at the church and you think it seems really unlikely that God can still make a difference, then remember that messed up places and unspectacular people are exactly where God is in the habit of fulfilling promises. If you look at the decline and division in the church, and then you remember that Jesus promised to be with us always, it can be hard to hold those things together. Yet God is in the habit of fulfilling promises in a context of apparent paradox and contradiction. So there you are this morning, believing against all odds that God can bring new life and birth into your life, into your church, into the world you love. It may seem impossible, but that's exactly when and where God is most likely to act, based on God's record. Because God is the God of surprises. We can't predict what God might do next, but we can think about what we will do next. We can think about what it might mean to invite God to bring new life to birth in us, through us, for the people around us. How will God bring hope and joy to the people around our tables and trees today through the things that we say and the things that we do? How will we make our own lives into stables and mangers that welcome the unexpected presence of God who shows up in rags? How will you bring God's love, forgiveness, God's presence into your gatherings, into your conversations, into your expressions of gratitude? As you face Christmas Day, can be a challenge, but I invite you to do as Mary did. Mary pondered all this in her heart, and I invite you to ponder it as well. How might God turn up for you, in you, and through you in this chaotic time in history as you go about your ordinary business, your ordinary life, expecting God to do extraordinary things? And so may the God of surprises bring new life to birth in you, for you, and through you this day and every day. Amen.